Every story you're about to hear actually happened. Some were buried, some were forgotten, and some were never meant to be told. But tonight you'll hear them all. Welcome to the dark side of reality. This happened a few years ago when I was working third shift as a security guard at a shuttered apartment complex. I'd been doing night rounds for just over a month. Basically the kind of job you take when you need cash and nobody. That's asking questions. The place was old, the management cheap, and the only real responsibility was to look like you were paying attention. Walk the parking lot, check a couple of doors, log the time you walked past the boiler room. That's it. The late hours weigh on you more than the work. Quiet gets heavy. The complex sat on the corner of a dull two-lane road that stayed empty after midnight. There were 6 buildings, each 3 stories, all identical beige boxes with narrow halls and dim exit lights. They'd stopped renting years before I started. A thin layer of dust sat on everything. The elevators were padlocked, lights flickered in one stairwell, and sometimes you'd find a straight chair in a lobby where it didn't belong. People had used this place for a while. People left things behind. I started noticing things almost immediately, but not anything dramatic. Small wrong details. A light on the 3rd floor landing that would be off when I walked by, then faint like somebody had just turned it down. A faint smell of someone's cooking drifting out of a unit that I knew was empty. The rustle of paper in the mailroom even though the door was locked. At first, I shrugged them off. Wind through broken windows, raccoons, a sloppy tenant with a key. You specialize the mind when you want to sleep at 2 in the morning, sitting in a plastic office chair. My rounds were predictable. I'd clock in at 11, sweep the lobby with a flashlight, check the back door every 30 minutes, walk the perimeter and the stairwells. The building had old motion sensors that rarely caught anything, and a dozen cameras with cloudy lenses that recorded in stuttering frames. My boss sent me canned emails reminding me to be vigilant and to call the non-emergency number if anything looked off. The first time I called in, it was because of a single unlocked window. They told me to log it and lock it if possible. That became my answer to a lot of the small things. 3 weeks in, I was doing my usual circuit around 3 in the morning. It was early autumn. The air had that dry bite where the heat of the day is gone, but the night hasn't cooled all the way. I had a thermos of coffee that had long gone cold. I remember the hum of the parking lot lamp as if it were a presence in the silence. When I got to building C, stairwell B, something about the door made me slow down. It was slightly ajar. The complex wasn't too used to doors being open from the inside. Someone had to have turned it. The lock didn't catch. I'd check open doors more out of habit than fear. You stick your head in, you call out, you write it down. I pushed the door the rest of the way and it moved with a sound like someone had folded paper, just a dry, thin creak. I told myself it was a tenant. I told myself 1,000 small lies to not be the person who noticed too much. I took the stairs, old metal, clinging to the echo of each step, and made the 1st floor sweep. The hall smelled like old carpet and dryer lint. Nothing. Clothes left in the washer. Mail scattered. I kept the flashlight low. If you flash a light too bright in an empty hallway at 3 in the morning, it feels like shouting. On the 2nd floor, I noticed a shoe by the railing. One dirty sneaker, positioned like someone had taken it off and left it there. No other signs of a person. The door at the end of the hall was closed. The apartment across the way, 2B, had its deadbolt turned. I knocked on it on reflex and kept my hand close to the pocket where my radio sat. The only answer was a faint tapping that sounded like someone tapping their fingers on the inside of a door. The rhythm wasn't a code or a message. It was casual. It was human. I wrote it in the log and moved on. Small things get written down in those logs like prayers. The idea is that if you commit them to paper, they become ordinary. About an hour later, I was walking the outside perimeter. The parking lot was an aquarium of pale puddles, reflecting the sodium glow. That's when I saw footprints in the mud near the dumpster, bare, small, like someone had been slipping through the lot. They didn't go to any car. They stopped at the service door and then Faded. Faded. Not like someone scrambled away. Like they just stopped being marked. I stood over them for a long time and tried to convince myself it was just wrong lighting. I took a photo because you always take a photo. The timestamp on my phone said 4:03 a.m. When I got back inside, the radio was on my desk, and the charge light had blinked out. The security office has one little window that looks out into the lobby. From that vantage, you can see people pass by in day. At night, it's moonscape. I sipped my coffee and scrolled back through the camera feeds to try and find the source of the footprints. The feeds were grainy, sometimes skipping frames. The camera by the dumpster showed nothing at 4:03. The camera would cut out for 10 seconds, then return with the timestamp unchanged, like it had blinked. I told myself the power cut, the feed lag, the cheap cameras. I logged it. After that night, the things became quieter, and that was the worst part. The first time something moved in a hallway, it was the sound of the ceiling tiles settling. The second time, it was the soft drag of something across linoleum, not heavy, not large. Just a whisper that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Once, I heard breathing in the stairwell, patient, like someone standing behind me and deciding which moment to step forward. I turned and shone the flashlight, and the stairwell was empty. The light had left a furrow on the concrete in the beam, just dust motes suspended. The breathing stopped. I told myself to laugh. I didn't. Weeks folded into each other. My nights slipped into the same pattern. Slow rounds, logs filled with small anomalies, coffee that never tasted hot enough. I began to notice the hallway sounds more than my own. The squeak of a cart in an empty lobby at 1 a.m. A radio playing faintly in an empty apartment, always the same old station, never loud enough to identify. Once the dryer in the laundry room started up by itself and completed a full cycle. When I opened the laundry room door, all the machines were cold, the lights off, the coin box full. The sound had come from inside the walls. There was a tenant who stayed in one of the occupied units on the ground floor. His name was Paul. He worked nights too, in a factory down the road. Over time we began speaking in small ways, nods in the morning, coffee when we both happened to be leaving at dawn. He told me once about how the building felt different at night, how the floorboards had moods. I'm not proud to say I listened for things I could call real and discounted the rest. You get defensive that way when you spend 8 hours alone in the dark. Then, one night, something broke the hesitancy. It was the second week of October, and the nights had a brittle edge. I was making my rounds through Building A when I heard a sound that made my stomach flip, the sound of keys. Not the rattling of a chain, but keys actually turning in a lock. It was slow, deliberate, a noise with intent. I stopped in the hall and listened as if stillness could force the sound to return. The keys turned again farther down the hallway. My radio felt very heavy on my hip. I walked toward the sound. With each step, the light seemed to bend differently. The fluorescent bulbs hummed like bees with a fever. The key noise stopped when I was about 10 feet from apartment 1C. The door was closed. No light leaked under it. My hand hovered over the knob, and I remember feeling stupid for doing it, for believing that anything would happen because I wanted it to. I knocked, soft at first, then louder. An old woman answered. She had a cardigan and a plastic bag of groceries. Her hair was in a bun. There was nothing about the moment that screamed unusual, except for the way her eyes looked like she was a little surprised to see me. She said something about being bumped by a neighbor, or maybe she had dropped a key. She smiled and went inside. The face was ordinary in every way, and that made it worse because there was nothing to explain the key noise that had stopped right when I arrived. I logged the incident, trying to be methodical. Later, in the office, I rewatched hours of camera footage around that hallway. The footage showed me walking toward the door, showed doors, showed light. At 2:37 a.m., there was a flash of white on the stairwell camera, a horizontal smear like someone rushing past, and then nothing. The hallway in the footage was empty. No figure, no keys, no woman answering the door. The cameras didn't show anyone open the door. The timestamp on the feed was consistent. I sat there and felt the world tilt in a way that isn't too dramatic. That's just quietly wrong. The next morning, I mentioned it to Paul on my break. He was making tea in the small kitchen near the management office. He listened without surprise and said, "Don't look for reasons. Things are easier if you don't poke them." That's the kind of thing people say when they reuse to things you don't want to know. The occurrences escalated in subtler ways. I'd find notes tucked under door frames with single words, "late" or "stay," written in pencil, the handwriting small and cramped. One morning, I found a child drawing stuck to the mailroom bulletin board of a family under a sky with a red sun, and it made the hairs on my arms rise because the sun was drawn with a ring like a halo. The drawing was dated the day before. There were no children in the complex that I knew of. There were sounds in the vents that matched footsteps. Once, I heard a whisper that sounded dangerously like my name from somewhere between the second and third floors. The voice didn't call. It didn't demand. It waited like a patient animal. I answered once with a stupid, "Hello?" The answer was a soft, almost affectionate chuff, like someone clearing their throat. The silence returned heavier than before. I started to do the rounds in different patterns to keep my sense of control. But the place has an architecture of patience. It learns when you move. It's subtle. The camera feeds would skip the frame with whatever passed and then resume as if nothing had happened. Things I moved in the office, a stapler. A report would be back where they were later, but slightly tilted, like someone had moved them with the pads of their fingers to read the label. One night, about 3 months in, I woke up on the couch in the office chair. The clock said 5:46 a.m. It was daylight outside already. My head was on my folded arms. I had the radio in my hand and a smear of dirt on my cheek. I had no memory of sleeping. There was a scrap of paper on the desk in front of me with 3 words in tiny block letters. "We re-waiting." I tore the page in half and put the pieces in my pocket because I didn't know what else to do. I threw them away the next day in a trash can that had been emptied. After that, I started bringing a friend to sit with me sometimes. Not for protection. There's little a second person can do if the place decides to be patient, but for shared sanity. My friend Marcus laughed a lot, which is a good sound in places like that. He didn't stay past midnight. He told me I looked tired. He told me not to be alone too much. He said, "If the building talks, make sure you listen to what it's actually saying." Then he left and I was alone again. The last thing I remember clearly is the cold. It was a night when the heat had failed the boilers and the corridors were thin, like paper between rooms. I had made one last round at 3 in the morning. The complex felt like it had inhaled and held. I was in the stairwell between 2 floors, the metal rail leaving a ghost of touch across my palm, when I heard footsteps from above. Not down, not behind, from above. Someone walking across the ceiling. Each footfall was placed, like they were pacing the rooms like you would pace a thought. I stood very still. The rail was slick in my hand. The footsteps stopped directly over me and stayed. The silence that followed was full of the sound of the building settling, but there was also a pressure, like someone leaning into the ceiling, listening. I remember thinking with a sharp and foolish clarity that maybe whoever it was would give up and go away. That was the last reasonable thought I had. Something moved above my head. It was small and precise. A scraping, a little shift, like someone dragging something across plaster. Then, a single familiar sound. Keys turning. Slow and deliberate. My radio hummed in my pocket with nothing but static. I wanted to move. I wanted to call out. I wanted to run. My legs felt turned to stones. I remember breathing and counting the seconds as if counting would add weight to the moment and bring it to a close. The keys turned and the noise of them being set down, soft, careful. And then, from somewhere far inside the building, a door opened. The sound of opening wood traveling across the pipes and settling into the stairwell. A line of floor creaked, the old way wood does when you stand in one place too long. And then, just as my patience thinned, the voice. It was the woman from 1C. She said nothing at first. It was a sound between a whisper and a sigh, perfectly non-committal. Then she said, very clearly, "We've been waiting a long time." I don't remember running. I remember the sound of my own shoes striking metal, and then the world filled with a smell like old books and cold iron. I remember the lobby light making long, soft shadows. I remember slamming the office door and jamming a chair under the handle like people do in films and feeling ridiculous and terrified. I called the number from my manager, and the line went dead. When morning came, the complex looked like any other old building in the sun. No footprints in the mud. No notes left on the desk. The camera showed me in the stairwell and then empty hall. There was no footage of the woman in 1C leaving. I walked the halls when the day shift came in, and the tenants were ordinary in the way people are when you never ask them about a night. Paul saw me and gave me a look like he knew something but wouldn't tell. Marcus texted me at noon, "You alive?" I left the job 2 days later. I told them the plumbing was bad, that the place needed more staff. I packed my stuff with hands that didn't feel like mine. I thought I was done. You think that leaving solves things. A year later, I found a photo online from someone doing an urban exploration in a different city. It was a stairwell, the very same pattern of rust, the exact chipped paint on the railing. The caption was about the eerie silence of abandoned places. The photo had a smear of white in one frame, like someone rushing, like a ghostly blot. And a comment underneath from someone who had once worked nights. They liked the quiet. I deleted the image because I didn't want to read the replies. The truth is lighter than that memory and heavier than it seems. I still dream of keys turning over my head. Sometimes when I'm passing an old building late at night, I slow down and listen for a faint breathing in the vents or a kid's drawing with a red-ringed sun taped to a glass panel. I don't know why it waited or what we meant. I don't know who else I should have told or what would have happened if I'd done something different. Some parts of the story make sense. An old building settling, a prankster with a key, a tired guard remembering things wrong. The parts that don't make sense are the things that leave the logs neat and the cameras blank, the way the place always sounds like somebody else has just stepped out of the frame and is still there in the corner of your perception. The real thing that unnerved me was how ordinary it all felt when you were inside it. Ordinary people, ordinary rooms, the smallest noises acting like they belong. If you ever have to work nights in an empty apartment building, listen, not just to the loud noises. Listen to the soft, patient things. Don't assume an empty hall means no one's there. Don't assume a missing shoe is a prank. And if you ever hear keys turning in the ceiling, don't stand under them waiting for the logic. Walk away or don't. Maybe if you stay, you'll get an explanation. Maybe you'll be politely invited to wait with them. Sometimes on nights when there's a thin fog and the street lamps make little pools of light, I still think about that last sound, the keys, the low voice, and the way they said so simply, "We've been waiting a long time." I never found out who we were. I never wanted to. But the thought of them waiting, patient and polite, is something you can carry around like a stone in your pocket. It's heavy, it's cold. It gives off no heat at all. I worked nights as a security guard for a small industrial complex on the outskirts of town. The company was cheap, the pay was barely enough, and the job was simple. Sit in a tiny office with 2 monitors, watch a handful of cameras, and walk the property every couple of hours. Most nights were uneventful. Sometimes I'd fall asleep in the chair and wake to the hum of the fluorescence. Sometimes a raccoon would set off a motion sensor, and on the feed it would look like a tiny ghost. It was the kind of job where the hours stretched and you start to notice things you'd never noticed during the day. The first thing I noticed was how sound changed at night. During the day, everything has a reason, the beeping of machines, footsteps, voices. At 2 in the morning, those same sounds are hollow. A distant truck becomes an event. A stray dog barking becomes a conversation. And if you're the only person awake for miles, every tiny noise grows a shape. The complex had one main building, a loading dock, and a long row of storage units. The lot was ringed by an old chain-link fence with strands of barbed wire at the top. Every few feet a light sat on a pole. They were the kind that flicker, not out, but in and out soft pulses that made the shadows breathe. The cameras were old and grainy, but they covered the important spots. My office sat at the corner of the building. The windows faced the yard. If I looked out, I could see the yellow glow of the lamps and the dark masses of the trees beyond the fence. The first night something felt off, I chalked it up to being tired. I was 2 hours into my shift, sipping cold coffee and scrolling through the camera feeds. The motion detection pinged on a camera by the back gate. There was nothing on the live view, just static and the wavering halo of a light. Then, for a fraction of a second, the feed cleared. A figure, small and hunched, moving along the fence line. I blinked and it was gone. The motion sensor logged a single second of activity. I grabbed my flashlight and did the routine walk. The yard smelled of wet asphalt and old oil. My sneakers squeaked. The flashlight beam cut a thin tunnel through the dark and rested on the fence. Footprints, small ones, pressed into the gravel near the gate, not raccoon size. The prints were narrow and close together, as if someone had been trying not to touch the ground. They led away from the gate and stopped at the shadow of an oak tree. I scanned the base of the tree and saw nothing. No disturbance, no hidden shelter. Just the silence the light poles left like a hole. I told myself it was someone homeless keeping warm or a teenager playing pranks. I logged it in the nightly report and went back to the monitors. The cameras never caught it again. For the next week, the same pattern repeated, a brief blip on a camera at odd hours, tiny footprints in odd places. No one around when I went to look. Sometimes the blips would show a movement inside the loading dock doors, a slow sliding of a shadow along the metal. Each time I checked the doors, the locks were fine, bolts snug, no sign of forced entry. On the 10th night, I was doing the rounds near midnight when I found one of the storage unit doors open. It was a small unit near the far end, the kind no one ever rents. The metal was dented and the padlock lay on the ground, rust fresh and damp. Inside the unit was a single pallet and a chair turned forward, as if someone had been sitting there and simply stood up. The floor had a ring of dirt, like the imprint of someone's pants where they had been pressed to the concrete. No footsteps leading away. I remember standing in the open doorway and listening. There was nothing, no city hum, no insects, no distant cars. Even the sound of my own breathing felt loud. I closed the door, latched the bolt, and used my radio to call the manager. He was annoyed, told me to lock it up and not to touch anything. I did as he said, but I couldn't just shake the feeling that I had walked through someone's private moment, like a whisper had been left in the air, and I had read it. After that, the incidents started to feel targeted. The motion sensors near the office pinged at 3 in the morning, always 3, always on Tuesdays and Fridays. The cameras would show the same small figure at the edge of the yard, watching the office. It never came inside. It never walked into the light. It favored the places where the lamps failed to reach, where the gravel held a softer shadow. One night I was on a break, leaning my head back against the worn chair, when the intercom in the office clicked. It's a stupid thing to startle to, but when you work alone, the snapping of a mechanical switch grabs you in the chest. A voice came over distant, low, like someone talking through a wall. It said nothing I could make out. It was the rhythm of speech without the words, a wash of breath and consonants that could have been anything. I hit the button to reply, "Hello? Who is this?" Static answered me for a beat, then the voice again, and then it went dead. I called maintenance in the morning. They checked the lines, swapped the unit. Old wiring, they said. We'll run a new line. But the line was replaced and the clicks continued. Sometimes I got a whisper, sometimes it was a long, dry exhale, like someone had leaned close to the mic and breathed through their teeth. And always, afterward, something shifted in the building. A chair moved slightly out of place. A paper that had rested on a table slid a fraction as if nudged. I started to keep a pad near the desk and wrote down every small thing. The shifts were almost polite. A hinge creaked 3 times. A door would tap against its frame twice. It was as if whatever was there understood rhythm, etiquette. It didn't trash things. It didn't leave messages. It arranged the world in tiny, annoying ways. One night, At nearly 4 in the morning, I was scanning the east lot when the camera froze. The feed pixelated, and for the first time, the figure stood in the open under the lamplight. Not hunched now, but standing forward, thin and tall for a second before the frame tore, and the image collapsed into static like a dropped call. My blood felt like it moved out of my extremities and lodged behind my ribs. I grabbed my flashlight and went out. The yard was colder than it had any right to be. The air tasted metallic. The lamps hummed, and the chain-link fence shivered under the wind. My boots left prints in the gravel toward the east corner, where the cameras were seldom checked. The prints ended at the foot of a pallet stacked with empty boxes. On the pallet, someone had set a small, crooked row of pebbles, black river stones spaced like the teeth of a comb. They were wet and cold and arranged with an intent that made the back of my neck prickle. I didn't stay. I called the police that time. The officer who came was young, worn in, more curious than frightened. He walked the yard with me, called it a prank, took pictures, left. His cruiser idled for a while after he drove off, and I watched it fade down the road and then disappear. After that night, the pebble row appeared in different places on the pallet. Around the base of the oak tree, once inside the small unlocked storage unit, balanced on the chair like a bead necklace. Each time, I would find them in the same morning light, precise and cold, as if whoever made them had left just before dawn and returned to shadows. The jests escalated, but always in that understated, personal way. Drawers would be slightly open, then closed again. My coffee cup would be turned half over. The monitors would catch a smear of movement at one corner, the kind you get from a curtain breathing. Once, late at night, I heard a slow tapping at the window behind my chair. I turned and saw nothing, only my reflection, larger and stranger in the pale light. Then the tapping came again, 3 knocks, and the sound felt like fingernails along glass. When I opened the blinds a sliver, there was a dirty handprint on the outside, small, as if made by someone pressing a child's palm to the pane as a joke. The smudge outlined ragged fingers and the heel of a hand. Under the palm, the glass had a faint smear of something dark that might have been oil or old paint or rot. I tried to keep the distance between myself and the thing measured. I documented everything. I took still photos, I left the cameras rolling, I asked my supervisors for a transfer. They laughed and said night guards were expendable. That was part of the job. My friends told me I was being paranoid. But when you're alone at night with the sounds and the small, impossible touches on the world, a logic grows in you that nothing else can dispel. You start to know the shape of the dark. On my last night, because I did quit, I handed in my resignation and planned to leave after my shift. I was exhausted. I wanted nothing more than to close the building, finish the log, and walk to my car. It was raining softly, the kind of rain that makes the lights bleed into the pavement. At 2:47 a.m., the motion sensor at the back gate pinged. On the monitor, the figure stood beneath the nearest lamp, in the rain, watching. Slowly, deliberately, it lifted one arm and pressed it against the wire of the fence. For a moment, I could see the shape of fingers long, too long to be human. I'd put on my coat and took the flashlight and walked out. My footsteps echoed. Rain felt like a thing that muffled and smoothed the world. The figure was still there when I reached the gate, but it had turned its head, not toward me, but back toward the yard. It didn't move when I called out. I remember the way the light struck the fence and painted thin vertical stripes across its chest area. I remember thinking I could have reached out and touched it and balanced on the line between fear and reason. Then, just to my left, something scraped the gravel. Not a footstep more, like a thing dragged slowly. I swung my beam. There, half buried under the pallets, lay an old security vest, faded orange, grass tangled at the edges, with a name tag still clipped to the chest. It was my name. My company had printed my name on newly issued vests. I sat down on the curb because the asphalt felt like a floor tilting under me. When I looked back up, the figure was gone. No retreating footprints, no shadow moving toward the trees, nothing. Just rain and the low hum of the lamps. I picked up the vest. It was dry as if it had been placed there after the rain had started. The name tag was clean, the ink not smudged. I held it and thought of all the small things. The pebbles, the handprint, the whispers, the tiny adjustments to my world. I understood in a way I hadn't before that this thing knew the lines of my life better than I did. It had been arranging. I packed my things slowly. When I turned on the radio to call in my last report, the voice was there clear this time, near as if it were beside me. It didn't speak a word I could parse. It merely exhaled, a long, wet sound, and then it laughed. There was no joy in it. The laugh curved the air and stopped. I left that night with the vest in the passenger seat of my car. I drove away thinking the thing would stop now that I was gone. For a week I slept with the lights on. I changed jobs. I moved to a place that had stairs and a landlord. But sometimes, usually when the house is quiet and the street lamp outside blinks in a tired rhythm, I wake with the sensation of two things. That something is watching from the dark, and that it knows where my name is pinned. 2 months later, I opened my mailbox and found a small row of black pebbles laid on top of a postcard with no return address. They were wet. I put them in a drawer and told myself it was a damn prank, that somebody knew me and wanted to scare me. But the drawer where I hid them later opened on its own one night, and the pebbles were lined, perfectly spaced, on the kitchen counter, pointing toward the window. There's no clever reveal here. No explanation that ties it up. I could say it was someone who liked playing with me. I could say it was a pattern my brain made up to keep sane. I could say the vest was a prank, the pebbles a joke. But I still get the feeling that if I stand too long at the window there, will be a figure slipping between the street lamps, watching the same way it watched the yard, putting the world back the way it wants it. If I close my eyes in the darkness and listen sometimes, I think I can hear the soft scrape of gravel and the spacing of tiny stones, landing one after another, arranged into a line that leads back to me. This happened to me when I was 19 during the summer after high school. I took a job as a security guard at a local mall. It was one of those sprawling complexes, a labyrinth of stores and food courts, usually bustling with life during the day, but eerily quiet at night. I was assigned to the graveyard shift from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., a time when the world outside felt like it was holding its breath. On my first night, I was given a quick rundown. "Just walk the perimeter," my supervisor said, his voice a low rumble. "Check the doors, make sure everything's secure. If you hear anything weird, don't go investigating. Just call it in." I thought he was joking. How scary could an empty mall be? At midnight, the fluorescent lights flickered overhead as I began my rounds. The silence was thick, broken only by the occasional hum of the air conditioning. I walked past the closed storefronts, their dark windows reflecting the dull glow of the lights. It felt strange, like walking through a ghost town where shadows lurked just out of sight. As I walked, I began to hear faint noises, distant echoes that seemed to resonate from the food court. At first, I brushed it off as my imagination playing tricks on me. But the sounds intensified, a soft clattering that grew louder as I approached. I paused, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. "Hello?" I called, my voice sounding small against the hollow space. No response. Just the unsettling silence that followed, as if the mall itself were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I shook my head, attributing it to the fatigue creeping in. I moved on. The hours dragged, and the strange noises continued to nag at me. As I began my second round, the security monitors flickered to life, displaying grainy black and white images of the mall's interior. I noticed something odd, a shadow flitting across one of the cameras. My heart raced. I zoomed in, but there was nothing there. Just empty corridors and the occasional flicker of a light. As I walked past the food court again, I noticed something different. A chair was pulled away from one of the tables, an odd sight in a place that had been locked up tight. I approached cautiously, the sound of my footsteps echoing unnaturally loud in the stillness. The chair was cold, as if someone had just risen from it. A chill snaked down my spine. "Okay, this isn't funny," I muttered under my breath. I took a deep breath and moved on. trying to shake off the unease that was settling in my gut. Around 3 a.m., I was stationed near the main entrance, scrolling through my phone to pass the time. The glow of the screen was comforting in the enveloping darkness. Suddenly, I heard it again, a soft sound like shuffling footsteps coming from the other side of the mall. I looked up, heart pounding, but the vast emptiness was all I could see. I grabbed my radio, my hands trembling slightly. "Control, do you copy?" I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. There was no reply, just static. I cursed under my breath. I was alone. As I made my way toward the source of the sound, I tried to convince myself it was just the wind or the building settling. But deep down, I knew I wasn't alone. Every step I took felt heavier, the oppressive silence wrapping around me like a shroud. The air was cold, and I could see my breath clouding in front of me. Then I heard it again, the unmistakable sound of a chair scraping against the floor. I froze, my heart racing. The noise was coming from the food court once more. I edged closer, the light above flickering ominously. I peered through the glass of the food court, expecting to see a prankster or maybe a stray animal. But there was nothing, just the stark emptiness of closed restaurants. Just as I was about to turn away, I saw a figure in the corner of my eye. It was a blur, a shadow moving swiftly behind one of the counters. Panic surged through me. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice echoing off the walls. I was met with silence once again. I backed away slowly, my instincts screaming at me to leave. But then I heard a faint giggle, a sound so innocent yet so out of place in that desolate mall. It sent chills down my spine. I turned on my heel and sprinted back toward the main entrance, heart pounding in my ears. I reached the lobby and locked the door behind me, leaning against it as I tried to catch my breath. I could still hear that giggle echoing in my mind, mingling with the silence around me. I called my supervisor, voice shaking as I recounted what had happened. He laughed it off, telling me it was probably just a trick of the mind. "You'll get used to it," he said. "It's just an empty building," but I didn't feel like I was getting used to it. The rest of my shift dragged on, the tension thick in the air. I felt watched, as if someone or something was lurking just out of sight. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see a figure standing behind me. When my shift finally ended, I was relieved to leave that empty shell of a mall behind. But something stayed with me, a sense of dread that clung to my skin. As I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that something had followed me from the darkness of that mall. Weeks passed, and I continued working the night shift. The strange occurrences became more frequent footsteps behind me, whispers in the dark, and that unsettling giggle that haunted my dreams. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was all in my head, but one night, everything changed. It was just past 3 a.m. when I got a call from the control room. "We've got movement in the north wing," the voice crackled over the radio. I felt a rush of adrenaline. "I'm on it," I replied, gripping my flashlight tightly. As I approached the north wing, my heart raced in anticipation. The air felt charged, electric with fear. I stepped inside, the sound of my footsteps swallowed by the vast emptiness. The only light came from the flickering bulbs above, casting long shadows that danced along the walls. I reached the end of the corridor, and just as I was about to turn back, I heard it again, a soft giggle, echoing from the darkness. My breath quickened. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to project confidence that I didn't feel. The giggle turned into a soft whisper. "Come play with me." Chills ran down my spine. I turned to run, but my flashlight flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. Panic surged through me as I fumbled for my radio, hands shaking. But there was only silence, the static mocking me. Suddenly, I felt a cold breath against the back of my neck. I froze, terror gripping my heart. "Someone there?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. But there was no response, just the eerie stillness of the mall. I bolted down the corridor, desperate to reach the exit. I didn't stop until I burst through the front doors, gasping for air, the cool night breeze hitting my face like a slap. I never went back. I quit the job the next day, but the memories of that place lingered. Even now, years later, I sometimes hear that soft giggle in my dreams, a haunting reminder of what lurked in the shadows. And I wonder, was it just my imagination? Or was something truly waiting in the dark, ready to play with whoever was brave or foolish enough to linger too long?